Welcome back, business leaders, to another installment of our weekly series. This is part of our ongoing Cybersecurity Leadership Council Fall Conference series here at the Salt Lake Chamber. I'm Nick Dunn with the Chamber. Sorry for the little delay, had a couple technical issues to work through, but everything seems to be working smoothly now. So we want to get started with today's presentation. First, just to remind you all that we're keeping track of the attendees of these webinars, and Strong Connections has kindly donated a Series 5 Apple Watch that will be given away in an opportunity drawing at the end of this series, our last week in November. So the more of these you attend, the more chances you'll get to win that opportunity drawing for the Series 5 Apple Watch. So look for that in our last webinar, the last week of November. So today's presentation is going to be following up on one of our earlier presentations, the concept of if you connect it, protect it. So today we're going to have attackers and their tools, presented by Paul Welford with AppRiver. I want to remind you, while he's presenting, please put in your questions to the Q&A window here in the Zoom chat. The Q&A function will have some discussion at the end and ask some questions of another employee there about what's presented today. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and transition to Paul for today's presentation.
Hello, and welcome back to the 2020 Cybersecurity Leadership Council webinar series. I'm your host today, Paul Welford, and we're actually going to be discussing attackers and their tools. I first would like to thank the Salt Lake Chamber in allowing AppRiver and our team to be a part of this huge event. I know we'd all prefer to be face-to-face, but unfortunately with COVID today, that's not the case. So let's jump right in and start discussing what's going on in the world today with attackers and their tools. First, a little background on myself. I've been with AppRiver for 5 years now. I've got a lot of experience on rolling out Office 365 environments, wrapping security tools around them to make sure that you and your organizations are protected. I also have a ton of experience in setting up compliance tools such as encryption to make sure the emails that you're sending and receiving are properly encrypted if it's compliance-driven information. And also on that compliance side, I have a ton of experience with setting up archiving solutions to make sure that if a litigation team or an auditing team decides to come knock on your door, you guys have that information to share with them, and they can easily go through it and make sure information is not being shared that shouldn't. I know previously you guys have had the opportunity to listen to some interesting information in some of the other webinar shows around sophisticated attacks and how those numbers have increased exponentially over the last year and honestly the last few years. And also the cost has just doubled, tripled, quadrupled on what it actually means for a business when they get hit with an attack. I know a lot of guys spend time saying that that couple of bucks to spend on a license to use a certain type of security tool, I don't think it's worth it today. But really it is when you think about it in the bigger picture aspects of that $10,000 fine from HIPAA, or if you get hit with ransomware and your data is locked down, you didn't properly back it up, now you're paying a hacker 6-7 figures in some cases to unencrypt your data. We'll actually go over some of those aspects of the type of ransomware that's out there today and how really easily accessible ransomware attacks are. So let's dive into it, and we'll start talking about, really your most vulnerable asset today as a business, and that's email. So on that scam central side of things, so I kind of like to call the internet really scam central, because you can, people today are at home. We're in that modern workplace. Our guard is let down. We're not looking at email in the same way that we used to when we were at our office. We're not locking our PCs as much as we used to, because we really don't have to worry about a coworker walking by and getting in our in our email and seeing that we're having a conversation with the board, or we're doing some type of conversation for potential sales within the business with our C levels or even managers, talking about our pay. That's always kind of that secret thing. Don't share your pay with your coworkers, right? So those are the reasons that we always said lock your PC, or even if your building gets compromised, a hacker decides to be boots on the ground. He wants to walk in your building and he starts walking around and he tries to find unlocked doors, unlocked PCs, and start easily accessing information. We don't really have to worry about that anymore today because we're sitting at home. At home, we don't have to worry about our significant other coming up to our PC and stealing information. We don't really care. I feel like our biggest fear nowadays is that little 5-year-old bundle of joy running down the hallway screaming animal crackers in the middle of a presentation. But really, the case is we should be more worried than ever about our PCs and the information that we're trading, especially via email, and even those direct messages. It used to be we'd get up and go hold that conversation with our fellow coworker. But now that conversation's happening via Teams, it's happening via Zoom, Slack, all of those avenues. And then, of course, email. So email is a very big focus, and the hackers have noticed those things, right? They know that email is probably the most used avenue for communication in today's modern workplace. So with that taking notice, they've kind of turned, hacking into a business almost. We always see on the news nowadays that ransomware is locking these cities down, right? They can't get information, maybe a police department, I think New Orleans was one of the ones, and maybe a couple of cities in Texas, police departments were locked down, and these guys were pushed back to actually handwriting tickets because of ransomware. Or even, a city council being locked down, or even, a school board. And students aren't able to go to school because they can't access grades, and teachers have no access to that information. So really handcuffing organizations. So ransomware has turned into a business because they are legitimate. They will lock your information down, and they'll give you a phone number to contact and give you that encryption key if you pay. If you're using proper postures, from a security and a backup standpoint, you are going to have your information backed up, and you aren't going to have to pay in some cases, but you never know. But those ransomware attacks are legitimate. There's 1-800 numbers you can contact, and they literally have a support line that you can call with support techs readily waiting to take your account information, and you pay, and they give you your encryption number. But those are the bigger attacks, right? What about the smaller ones? You can literally have a young man sitting in an office today that gets irritated with a company, decides to go home, and he can go online and purchase an attack vector, and he can roll it out himself, and he can contact a support line to back him up and teach him how to roll out that attack and hit your organization. On our next slide here is a perfect example of it. We call it phishing kits for sale. I like to say this is almost like an Amazon for hackers. You can go out and purchase pre-built, pre-packaged attack solutions and attack your own company, or a friend that's maybe no longer is a friend anymore, and spend $80 and easily cause thousands and thousands of dollars worth of damage. So it's very simple to roll out an attack today. So that couple of bucks, I feel like that people get disgruntled over, for security and compliance solutions, really doesn't add up to the little amount of money that hackers are spending to gain exponential amounts of money from your business. So it's very easy to purchase this thing. I feel like we all get used to watching the movies, and this kid spends hours in his, down in his basement, and he writes this big glorified code and he attacks the government. It's not really the case anymore. You can easily go online, search for these attacks. And some of these attacks you've probably seen in your own business today, or if you're running solid security posture, you may not have seen them, but your IT admins have seen them. And on this next slide here, this may be something that you've seen, a credential harvesting. So this is really how an attack starts. They want to get your credentials. So they send out an email into your organization, and that email gets into your inbox, and it looks like OneDrive. We probably all use OneDrive, or we probably all use SharePoint, as you see here in this screenshot. You open up that email, sends you to a website that looks like a legitimate Microsoft site. It asks you for your password and your information to authenticate. On the other side of this authentication, obviously, he's a hacker. He's using some sort of keylogger to pull your credentials. And then from there, he's off to the races. In some cases, we think, man, a hacker doesn't want to get into my PC. I'm just the sales rep. I'm just the front desk person, whatever. I'm just a nurse or an attorney in a massive law firm. You're the gateway drug. You're the tiny little entrance into that large organization. And then from there, that hacker is going to creep his way up to the top and get to those C levels. And then it trickles back down. He's going to see that your C levels and the way they communicate with you guys, or your managers or your directors. And they're going to take that take their signatures and their display names, and they're going to send an email to you that you may think is from them because you're not paying as much attention as you usually would. And they may be requesting, hey, we got this office party coming up. Let me get $500 worth of gift cards. Can you go ahead and send that information over to me? So you think, oh, cool, yeah, go ahead and send it. And then boom, now you've given away $500 of your organization's money, not knowing it to a hacker. So it's a very, very, simple but sophisticated attack. And it really does start with spoofed websites like this that give you that warm and fuzzy, that real quick glance. It is Microsoft. Another good example here is, the SharePoint portal. SharePoint is a file sharing program that Microsoft has built out. It's legitimate, it's robust, it's safe, in so many aspects. But the front end can easily be copied by a hacker, and then they can paint their own little picture behind it to make it look like it's something legitimate for you to put in your information and send your company information and credentials out. If you look at the URL at the top there, you'll see that it says OneDrive, but if you're looking at the actual site, it says SharePoint. So two different aspects there. And then the actual main URL is obviously wrong too. It would start with something along the lines of Office 365 or Microsoft 365, and then roll into that SharePoint address. But this is something you would see as a very, very common and cheap and easy to use attack vector in today's hacking world in the modern workplace. So with that being said, we kind of painted the picture of what hackers have at their fingertips. What about you? What about you as an end user? What is your IT team able to use to protect you and make sure that these attacks don't happen? There's a handful of things, in my opinion, that are very simple and very easy to roll out. One of the biggest things in my opinion, especially in the modern workplace, we're all working remote, is a filtering system. Having a true security filtering system up and running in front of your organization to make sure that every piece of mail that comes in, every piece of email that comes in your organization is filtered. It goes through a certain level of checks and balances to make sure there's nothing malicious, like a link or some malware or ransomware that shouldn't be there. So that's almost like that first line of defense, in my opinion, something very simple that can be used. A lot of the tools like that AppRiver supplies today, they come with quarantines and sandboxes that you can open, these messages in to make sure that you don't, truly infect your organization or put your credentials somewhere that don't belong. So that's kind of, in my opinion, that first line of defense, if you will. But even looking at it from a compliance-driven standpoint as well. So it may not just be a hacker, right? It could also be an auditing team. You're a HIPAA-compliant organization. You get a disgruntled employee that decides to start copying information and sending it outside of the company. That's technically an internal hacker at that point, right? It wasn't that guy sitting in the office sitting in the basement that decided to purchase the hacking tools, right? And, and send malicious information in. It was, Johnny down the hallway decided that he didn't like what he was doing anymore, and the company irritated him. So he's going to start forwarding information out of the organization. Whether you're HIPAA, FERPA, FINRA, GLBA, whatever compliance umbrella you're falling under, there are massive fines tied to emails that are leaked out of an organization that contain personal information. So utilizing an encryption tool is extremely important in today's world. And I can't stress that enough, to make sure that every email, going out of your organization is scanned with AI. Make sure that, you're not having some sort of message that contains maybe a social security number at that point, and it's sent out. That's a violation. Why not have AI look at that message and find that encrypted or find that PII and encrypt that email to make sure it's protected in transit and all the way to its recipient. And then in response, that recipient responds back, making sure that information is encrypted there as well. And even talking about disgruntled employees being kind of an internal hacker, right? What about, archiving solutions? Archiving is something that I feel that gets really overlooked from a compliance and a security standpoint, because you're wanting to protect yourself from those internal hackers. So, in the event that maybe somebody trips and falls, maybe somebody hurts themselves, or decides to just, sue a company for other, personal reasons, you want to have an archive up and running. You want to make sure that your messages are protected in an immutable format, right? So that if a litigation team does come and say, hey, we want this block of information from these date ranges containing, these words, or from this user, you can easily export that data send it off to a litigation team or even an auditing team. So there's many ways to protect yourself in the world today. And it's really important, in my opinion, to protect yourself, especially today in that modern workplace. We don't want to let our guard down. We really want to make sure that we are taking a deeper look at those security postures, because everybody's remote. Everybody's doing what they want to now. There is nobody watching over your shoulder to make sure you're locking your PC or you're not writing password down on sticky notes. We're doing something to look at those emails and that information that's going in and out of an organization. But that's it for me today. I appreciate your time. We're going to go ahead and wrap it up, and I'm going to toss it over to one of my coworkers, Aaron Barnes, and he is going to answer some questions if you have any. It was a pleasure talking with you, and look forward to working with you again soon.
We want to thank Paul for that excellent presentation on some of that information. And now we want to welcome Aaron Barnes, who's also with AppRiver. Aaron has graciously agreed to join us to help answer any questions from that presentation and also have some discussion with our attendees. We want to remind all of you participating that you can please go ahead and enter any questions into the Q&A window there in the Zoom platform. We'd love to have some questions and some discussion with Aaron. So Aaron, thank you again for making some time to join us today.
Oh, thanks, Nick. We appreciate the opportunity to be here and share some of our knowledge.
Well, it certainly is an important time with so many people working from home. And of course, we have an election going on. So there's a lot of discussion around digital security and cybersecurity in general. And so to kind of kick things off, and hopefully, again, participants, if you have any questions or thoughts, please enter those into the Q&A window on the Zoom platform. But to start things off, Aaron, Paul mentioned in his presentation some of these email security tools that are available out there. So for a business, whether large or small, that's looking at acquiring those, what's the best way to actually go out and get those kinds of email security tools for their business?
For a larger business, we would typically see them having some kind of IT staff on hand, and they usually have their own procurement process. In those cases, I would say reach out to AppRiver. We'd be happy to speak with you. For the small and medium-sized business, they usually don't have those internal technical resources, right? They're going to need a little more help getting these situations in place, making sure they're configured properly. And that's, in those cases, we suggest they reach out to a local service provider in your area. Obviously, Advanced Tech is our go-to. There's a few others out there, but if you're a small or medium business owner, I would say this is something you don't want to try and learn yourself as you go, because most people learn through making mistakes, and some of these mistakes could be extremely expensive. Definitely lean on your local experts, bring them in and have them consult with you to see what you need and help you get set up.
Excellent, thank you. And kind of in addition to that, obviously there's a lot more than just email security services as far as tools that are available to businesses as they look at cybersecurity. So what else can be done when we're talking about these types of threats, especially the advanced ones that look and feel legitimate? And Paul mentioned some of those email phishing attempts or where they're trying to get your credentials. In light of those kinds of attacks, what are some other things that businesses can do beyond just getting maybe some of these email security services? What other things should they be looking at?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few things out there that, throwing money at the problem won't replace certain other approaches. In my opinion, one of the most important things you can really do is a little bit of education, some training. Obviously, Paul and myself, we work for an email security company, so we're required to do training constantly to stay up to date on what's new and trending in the threat world. But especially in this work from home environment, it's really important that even non-technical employees, your secretaries, your technicians, your even simple things like service-based employees, if they have an email account, they need to have some kind of, at a minimum, annual training to help them identify what a bad email looks like. There's usually some telltale signs. I don't want to go too deep into that subject on this call, but a little bit of education really goes a long way. Most people in this environment, this day, have seen this education material before, but it's seriously important to repeat that over and over again, because it drifts to the back of your mind. You forget. It's not always what you're thinking about. So I think the education portion is almost as important as the actual defense tools themselves.
That's excellent. That's one thing I was actually going to ask about, is the training and educational component for employees to know how to recognize these kinds of things. So I'm glad you mentioned that. One question that came in from one of our audience members, Kate, asked, do you have any recommendations for small nonprofits? Yeah,
there's two things I want to talk about here. The first is there's an organization out there called TechSoup. TechSoup is almost an arm of Microsoft that handles their charitable technology program. Microsoft and TechSoup, they really give away some amazing tools to nonprofits. Some of those are pretty powerful security tools, and they're very generous. Some of them are free. Some of them are like 1/10 of what they would normally cost. I would say start with TechSoup, and then depending on your realm, I've seen nonprofits that I used to work with the people that did the Rose Bowl, right? And if they have a security breach, it's not the end of the world. But I've seen other nonprofits that handle, special needs children or people with disabilities. And even though you're a nonprofit, you still fall under those HIPAA rules. So, if you have HIPAA violations, you're still going to get fined, which for a nonprofit can be particularly devastating. So definitely look at the TechSoup, see what's out there for free. There's some great nonprofit offerings. And then if you're in a sensitive industry, if you're handling medical information or financial information, lean on your local experts. Most of the IT companies I work with, they're all community-based, and they're usually really happy to lend a hand where they can.
Excellent, thank you. So TechSoup, just to reiterate the name for anyone who wants to look up that entity. Another question, Aaron, from James, again, talking about some of the education or training resources for employees. James asks, can you point us to some education sources to help provide the training you're talking about?
So depending on the size of your organization, if you have a smaller organization, I would say lean on your local IT provider. So like if you work with Advanced Tech, for example, give them a shout. They should be able to provide you with some basic guidelines and some lighter training. If you're a larger organization, if you're getting past that 100 employee mark, there are some professionals out there who specialize just in IT security training. One of the more well-known ones that I've done a lot of work with is called KnowBe4. They do excellent work, and they'll do an initial security assessment on your organization. They'll put some bait out there, see who goes for it. They'll build a kind of a profile of your company's security maturity. They'll provide you with some information on where you can use improvement at, and then offer some education and training from there. That KnowBe4 company, there's a few other of those out there, but they really specialize just in training and education around cybersecurity. And of course, your local providers should be able to hook you up pretty well there as well. And also blogs. Most of the information I get, I just read. I stay on the AppRiver blog. I look at there's a couple of tech blogs I follow on LinkedIn, and they usually, when there's a new attack coming out, they'll drop a couple paragraphs. I might spend 20 minutes a week reading these things, but when you do it every week, it keeps you on top.
So kind of building off of that, for nonprofits that maybe don't have an IT leader or don't have a local IT provider, if essentially they just have a board, maybe one full-time staff or very, very minimal staff, any thoughts for those folks? And I guess maybe one way to frame the question, are there resources that maybe don't require contracting with one of those providers, but even if there's just some best practices out there, some templates or anything that you've kind of come across, that just information that some of these smaller groups could look at, that would be helpful.
Working with TechSoup, they make things pretty easy to sign up, even if you're not a technical person. Their application form is very simple. They're going to ask you, your organization's name. They're going to ask you for your 501c3 information and a couple other very basic things like that. And then once you get enrolled in the program, frankly, you're going to need a little help to get started. And I know a lot of people, they don't want to spend a couple bucks to pay somebody to help them, but you can usually find a local provider that will get you set up. And once you've gotten past that initial setup, you're usually on cruise control from that point. It's hard. It's like getting mechanic work done. You're going to be hard pressed to find a mechanic that's going to do it for absolutely free. You have to spend a few dollars to get rolling again.
Excellent, thank you. Maybe one kind of broad question as we wait again for any other folks who are watching who want to add in some questions in the Q&A window. But in a very general sense, for any of the businesses, or even as we've heard from a couple of the smaller nonprofits who are watching today, if they're thinking, okay, this information sounds great, what would be my first step? If I finish this webinar and I'm going to go do something, what's the first most important thing they can do to move forward with all these recommendations?
My sincere recommendation there is to find an expert. Don't call your nephew. Don't call your cousin that builds computers. Not that they may not be reliable sources, but you want to speak with somebody that does this for 40 hours a week, someone that's already put in their 10,000 hours. There's a lot of nuances to specifically email security, and overlooking a minor detail could leave a gaping hole in your security posture. So my sincere suggestion is find an expert that you can use at least as a sounding board. Almost every partner I work with, they're always willing to come out and meet you and sit down and speak with you and give you a consultation. And they very rarely charge any money for that. Most of these guys they're pretty friendly and they're happy to speak with you. So take advantage of that. Talk, listen, ask questions, and they'll get you started off on the right path.
Excellent. Thank you, Aaron. I'm not seeing any other questions pop in right now, so we'll give folks a second if anything else comes to mind. But while they're doing that, if we don't have any other questions, any final thoughts or recommendations or exhortations from you to our watchers today? We're able to hear that okay, Aaron. Just asking if there's any kind of final thoughts as we close out the discussion today.
Yeah, the email security space, it's rapidly evolving. It's something of an arms race. It's always worth keeping an eye on. If you're not working with somebody today to help you batten down your email system, I strongly recommend it. Your email system is your biggest attack space in your IT security. You hear stories about servers and websites getting hacked. That does happen, but 9 times out of 10, an electronic attack comes through your email, and it's just all too often overlooked. Give it a little bit of time, talk to your experts, and make sure you're in a good position going forward.
Wonderful. Thank you, Aaron. And thank you again for your time being with us today to answer some of these questions from our chamber members and business leaders here in the community. I want to thank you and AppRiver for the work you do, and also thank Paul for the excellent presentation he shared with us that we saw before. And thank you both again, and appreciate your time. We want to remind everyone that there are still some more webinars that you can watch. We'll be here the same time next week with another webinar presentation. And again, I want to make a plug for that Series 5 Apple Watch provided by Strong Connections. We'll be tracking the participants, and we'll have the opportunity drawing at the final webinar in the last week of November for any of those folks who are interested in that. Thank you again, Aaron, Paul, everyone at AppRiver. and we'll see all of you again this time next week. Before we sign off, we want to thank our Respond level sponsor, Strong Connections, for being a great partner for the Cybersecurity Leadership Council Fall 2020 webinar series. Thank you again.
Thanks, Nick.